Start? Okay. Well, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome back to the second part of our China Town Hall event today. Or if you just joined this portion of our program, welcome to our local China Town Hall, following on the heels of the National China Town Hall webcast with Campbell that just concluded half an hour ago. My name is Mingbao Yu, and I'm currently serving as the director of the Center for Chinese Studies here at the University of Hawai'i at Mānoa. Today's event is hosted by the Center for Chinese Studies and the School of Pacific Asian Studies at the University of Hawai'i at Mānoa. The purpose of our local China Town Hall today is threefold. First, to help our audience to synthesize and reflect on the content presented during the national webcast we just saw with Dr. Kurt Campbell, US Deputy Secretary of State. Second, to give our audience the opportunity to learn how other members of our community view the US and China relationship. And thirdly, to provide an opportunity for an in-depth discussion with our distinguished panel of experts on the topic of how to engage China at the University of Hawai'i at Mānoa through academic educational exchanges. Before we turn to our panelists today, who each will introduce themselves, I would like to quickly go over the order of our today's program. After the panelists' self-introduction, I would like to quickly mention the order of our program. After the panelists' self-introduction, each will share their impression on the national webcast. Then we will invite our panelists to answer 2 rounds of questions and share with us their expertise on the past, current, and future trends and promises of US and China academic educational exchanges from a national, international, professional point of view, and more specifically from a UH Mānoa perspective. After that, we'll have an open discussion with our panelists can answer your questions from the audiences before offering us their concluding comments. And that will wrap up our program for today. So let us begin with our distinguished experts introducing themselves. And I would like to invite Peggy Blumenthal, who is joining us via Zoom today, to begin. Peggy?
Thank you so much, and aloha from New York City. I'm Peggy Blumenthal. I'm senior counselor to the president of the Institute of International Education, known as IIE. And some of you may not know what IIE is. It's a very large global not-for-profit organization that works closely with the State Department to manage the Fulbright program and various other educational and cultural exchanges by the US government, by private foundations, by corporations, and so on. Before joining IIE, which I did in 1984, I worked at the University of Hawai'i at Mānoa, coordinating graduate fellowships at what was then the Center for Asian and Pacific Studies. I'm delighted to know it's now a school, so that's good. And earlier, I worked at Stanford University's Overseas Studies program. But my early career was almost entirely devoted to US-China relations, working first at the National Committee on US-China Relations and then at the Asia Society, helping to promote a broader American understanding of China and also to help exchange teams, athletic teams, scholarly exchange, diplomats, and so on. So this is a topic very close to my heart.
Thank you, Peggy. Next. Professor Cathy Clayton.
Yeah, my name is Catherine Clayton, Lei Kaixi. I'm an associate professor and chair of the Department of Asian Studies here at UH Mānoa. I have been going back and forth to China since 1986, when I spent a year studying in Beijing on a study abroad program through my college at the time, and ended up living in China off and on for more than 9 years after that. My dissertation in the cultural anthropology was about Macau during the period leading up to the handover. So I was there when it was still Portuguese, and looking at sort of how the political transition shaped the way people thought about themselves as Chinese. And in the years since then, I've developed other research projects in Macau and southern China, and I teach courses about China regularly. I'm not allowed to teach full courses about China all that often because we do a lot of interdisciplinary, interregional stuff in Asian studies, but I do incorporate teaching about China into just about every class. I teach at both the undergraduate and graduate level.
Thank you, Cathy. Dr. Brent White.
Hi, I'm Brent White. I'm the Chief Global Officer at UH Manoa, and also a professor of law. Prior to joining UH Manoa about, I think, 9 months ago, I was at the University of Arizona, where I was Vice President for Global Affairs. And in that capacity, had the privilege to open and then oversee 5 campuses in China, which are today still operating successfully. So we'll talk a little bit about that. My connection to China goes back not quite as far as Professor Clayton's. I first went in 1990 and studied at the same university where I studied Chinese back in 1990, so a long time ago, and a long-standing interest in China and this important conversation about how we continue to engage.
Thank you. Next, Professor Baoyan.
Hi, my name is Baoyan Cheng. I'm a faculty member at the Department of Educational Foundations, College of Education and University of Hawaii. Educational exchange is a topic that's near and dear to my heart. It has great significance both personally and professionally. Personally, I came to the US as an international student 25 years ago. So it's fair to say I am a beneficiary of educational exchange. And professionally, my research in recent years has been focused on international student mobility, especially Chinese students studying overseas. From the sending side, which is China, I examine the motivation and decision-making of Chinese students and their families in studying overseas. And from the receiving side, which is the US, I examine the various aspects of Chinese students' adaptation, as well as the impact of the international sojourning experience on them. So I'm very glad to be part of this conversation today.
Thank you all very much for being here today. And I'm delighted to note that this panel has the ideal combination of expert views, with Peggy from the Institute of International Education representing a kind of national and government perspective, followed by Baoyan and Cathy Clayton, who can speak to an academic and international perspective. And finally, Dr. Brent White, who may give us some insights to the UH Manoa institutional and student point of view. So we would like to begin with asking our panelists to share with us their impression on Kurt Campbell's comments we've just seen together on the national webcast, and particularly with an eye to our topic, which is about how to engage China at the University of Hawaii through academic and educational exchanges. He spoke about different areas, but I think he spoke about like maybe 10 or 15 minutes, particularly about educational and academic exchange. So why don't we start with Peggy? Peggy?
Thank you. Yes, I would say that he did indeed give a very comprehensive overview of U.S. policy towards China, the differences and the areas of possible collaboration. So there was not too much surprising in what he was stressing, and of course, particularly presenting the Biden administration's very active efforts to improve the relationship. The one thing that surprised me when he was asked what are the key areas of engagement, he started out saying, of course, people-to-people exchange is very important, but then he said, at my core, the essential responsibility is to take climate change seriously. And I hadn't really thought that would be an area that he would particularly hone in on, but he certainly, he praised John Kerry, and he talked a lot about China's falling back a little bit in terms of its commitments. The one area that I was particularly pleased when he went, Brent asked him a question about the level 3 travel warning, and I was pleased to hear him, Kurt Campbell, to say that I'll simply say that the level 3 travel advisory is under serious consideration, and he agreed with Brent's premise that it does serve as a deterrent to student exchange and to Americans going abroad. I'm sure we'll talk more about that later, but I've listened to a lot of State Department people be asked that question and not be quite as forthcoming. So I guess it helps to be the Deputy Secretary of State. You can actually say that this is something that they are looking at very seriously.
Great, thank you very much, Cathy.
Okay, sure. I enjoyed the talk. I'm not a international relations person, so I'm not sure I can comment necessarily on sort of the policy. I was struck by 2 phrases that he used. One was the habits of cooperation, that we need to build these habits of cooperation in sort of, it's not just about, can you call up a diplomat and talk about some issue? We have to have these habits of being able to talk to each other, even when there are issues, the going gets tough, right? We still need to be able to pick up the phone and talk. And I think those habits are things that start, at the level of students and, getting into the habit of talking to people who think differently than you do. And the other thing he referenced, he didn't quite use the phrase, but he referenced the idea of the securitization of everything, and the idea that, as US-China relations get more tense, everything seems to be a national security issue. And I think that is I think he noted that Xi Jinping noted that this was a problem, and I think he was sort of agreeing with that and saying, listen, we need to sort of scale back on how we think about what is national security anyway? How do we think about that? What does it really mean? And I think this is a debate that I've heard going on in a lot of different areas in Asia and the Pacific Islands, to sort of say, what do we mean when we say security? Do we mean the well-being of the people who live in these places, and or do we mean the states and military might and people throwing their weight around? So I think that was a really interesting kind of conversation that he opened up.
Thank you. Brent?
Yeah, so I was struck, I guess not surprised, but struck by the rigidity, I think, of the framing. So, he spoke a lot about competition between China and the United States, and that, that we're in a competition, but not in the healthy sense of competition. Competition can be good, but more like a nefarious competition. And early on, he framed it as China was testing us early on in the
Yes.
Biden administration. They saw the US in decline, or seeing where they could exploit that. So he sets up this competition as very much a zero-sum competition, and then listed a whole lot of areas where we are competing: technology, AI, biosecurity,
Right.
medicine. There are lots of areas, and in my view, frame those as areas of non-cooperation. So if we have this competition, we don't cooperate. And I thought it was much too broad. And then the one area, and Peggy, I was struck by the same thing as you were, that he mentioned climate, and very clearly laid that out as an area for cooperation, which for UH Manoa is an opportunity, given our strength in climate science. And so I think about educational engagement around climate very clearly opened in the conversation. So to take the positive side is there's an opening. There were at least a couple bones thrown out, people collaboration, educational collaboration. So I think there's an opening there. And as someone who believes we should do everything possible to lean in to our relationship with China and opening doors, I think we should consider, as an institution, what can we do to collaborate in the area of climate and education? So take those as our opens.
Thank you. Yeah.
Overall, I was quite pleased with the tone of the talk. I appreciate the emphasis on building common ground, commitment to peace and stability, communication. I even heard education and people-to-people exchange a few times, which are things that I would like to highlight, emphasize in my own talk. There are profound differences between the two countries, and the challenges are real. Fundamentally, the relationship between US and China is a competitive one, but it is important to keep communication open and to make the competition as fair, transparent, and healthy as possible, as he mentioned in his talk. The political scientist Graham Allison called this the kind of tension between the rising power and existing power of the Thucydides trap, which indicates the inevitable conflicts or friction and also tendency toward wars. So in some sense, the friction between China and US is inevitable, but it is important to communicate and try to understand each other. The world, including the US, is not used to seeing a strong China. And it's still trying to figure out what to do with the rise in China, to isolate it, to contain it, or to engage it. Our position is to engage China, as the title of our panel suggests. The best way to avoid wars and to reduce friction is through communication and trying to understand each other. and educational exchange provides such effective channel for communication and understanding.
Well, thank you to our panelists for their very rich and informative impressions. And I would like to remind the audience that we will have an open discussion section where you can ask questions to the audience. People here in our room, please use the paper that we provided, and people who join us on Zoom, you can submit your questions to our panelists via the chat forum. Okay. So we would like to now move on, zoom in on our topic, which is really about academic exchanges, and particularly here at Mānoa. And I would like each panelist to think about this question or to reflect on this question. So research shows the benefits of educational exchanges, both from individual and institutional perspectives, as well as possibly a government perspective. With reference to your field, to your research, or to your job, why do you think educational exchanges are so important? And why don't we start with Peggy, since I think she can provide us with the kind of national and government perspective.
Yeah, thank you. I would just say that in addition to managing exchanges, I has a long history of conducting research on this field. And in addition to tracking numbers of students who go abroad and who come here, we also have conducted studies on what the benefits are when people, Americans particularly, go abroad and then come back. And what we have found and what other research has shown is that when American students study abroad, they become more self-reliant, they become more self-confident, they become more mature, and they become better prepared for careers in the global marketplace. And we also have done studies of employers, and we've asked employers a big survey saying, do you think that study abroad is important? And almost all of them say, well, not really. But then we say, well, what characteristics are you looking for in a future employee? And they say, we want them to be self-reliant, we want them to be mature, we want them to be able to communicate with teams around the world. And then we go back to them and say, that's what study abroad does. And it's like a revelation that they realize that exactly the qualities that study abroad produces in young people are the qualities that they're going to need to find in their future employees. So I thought that's one perspective that's very important. In terms of the national need for Americans to study abroad, it's imperative, and I think Kurt Campbell talked about this, if we are going to sustain communications at high government levels and really all the way down the government, from the ambassadors on down to the working guys and gals, you need to have a real understanding of how to talk to people who come from a different background, who come from a different culture, and by Americans studying in China and studying around the world, we're building this new cohort of American expertise that is going to be so important in terms of dealing with international partners, whatever your job. I mean, whether you're in the government, whether you're in business, whether you're in the not-for-profit sector, or whether you're in academia, it's just going to be impossible to be effective unless you can function comfortably in a different environment. And finally, I just want to add one personal note. The first time I was in a Chinese environment was my freshman year in college, which is way too many years ago. I spent 3 months living in Taiwan, and it really changed my whole career path. I had always thought I was going to be an English major and an English teacher, and it's so amazing when you plunge yourself into another environment. And also you learn that you can actually speak Chinese, which you never thought you could when you were in the classroom. So it's a very important element to do that, I think, to give you the sense of what a living language is and to get your own confidence that you can actually one day speak it.
Great, thank you. So I think now we would like to hear maybe from Cathy and Baoyan to talk about sort of international perspective, but also the academic side of it.
Do you want to go first?
Okay. Well, there have been, as Mimba mentioned, there have been rich bodies of literature on the impact of educational exchanges at different levels, institutional and individual level. Institutional benefits, I think maybe Brent will cover it, include generating revenues, which is unfortunately important motivation for lots of institutions, and also adding diversity to student body, increasing enrollment and providing critical teaching and research assistance, especially in the STEM fields, etc. And individual benefits include, as Peggy just mentioned, include improved knowledge of the host country and culture, improved language skills and other skills. But I want to emphasize one particularly important benefit, that is the potential of educational exchange to transform people's values and worldviews. Research has shown that international studying experiences may enable one to become more open-minded, more aware of global issues, and thus more accepting of different races and cultures. And they may also make one more aware of global, enhance one's global understanding, and thus serve as a potential pathway to global citizenship. I would like to provide one example that is deeply connected with Hawaii to demonstrate the potential of education exchange to transform one's views and values and worldviews. That is Sun Yat-sen, who is the founding father of the Republic of China. He came to Hawaii in 1879 at the age of 13 with the help of his older brother Sun Mei. He first attended Iolani School for 3 years, where he mastered English from not knowing a word of the language. And he later moved on to Punahou School, which was called the Oahu College back then. But he was there only for 1 semester because his brother felt that he had started to betray the Chinese culture, and so he sent him home because when he expressed his wish to become Christian, so his brother sent him home. But needless to say, the years that Sun Yat-sen spent for his education in Hawaii was one of the most formative periods of his time and had significant implication for his later revolutionary career. Even he himself told journalists later in 1910, I'm quoting, "This is my Hawaii. Here I was brought up and educated, and it was here that I came to know what modern civilized governments are like and what they mean." So in today's world that faces increasing ideological polarization and social fragmentation along the lines of race, class, and citizenship, connecting people on the basis of mutual understanding and respect becomes a especially pressing issue. International education exchange provides opportunities to build solidarity and a cosmopolitan spirit among people around the world. So those. I just want to add that because of those above mentioned benefits, it is the international relations that eventually benefit from the educational exchanges, because what those students experience during the exchange will likely have profound impact on how they perceive their identity, which will in turn affect the extent to which they will serve as bridge between two cultures and countries.
Yeah, so thanks to both of you for those thoughts. I think you pretty clearly encapsulated why it's really important, certainly at the level of the sort of individual student. It's a transformative experience studying abroad, right? Most of us up here can speak to that from experience. You learn so much about people, and it's not necessarily just like, building bridges and becoming, learning more about the culture. It's also those experiences in which you fail to understand why these people are the way they are, that really, you learn from that failure. You learn about yourself and you learn about your assumptions of the world. And I think it is really, humbling, but also transformative, both in terms of the way you think about the world and your position in it, and the way you understand yourself and your own culture. But I want to speak a little bit more to the question of why it's important for research. There's been a lot of statistics published about sort of collaborative research between China and the US and how much it is incredibly productive for scholars in the US and China to work together and publish together, and there's numbers of, what percentage of, patents and new breakthroughs in technology have come from collaboration. It's astonishing. That's not my field either. I'm a social scientist, humanities type of person. But even for us, especially for us, I think it's vital. I do know in this heightened tension, I know of several colleagues who have decided it's just not worth it, and they'd like to try to design a research project about China that doesn't require them to go to China, because it's kind of, they feel it's dangerous or difficult. And there's, you can do some research this way. It's not totally invalid. Certainly that's the way the generation of people before us did research when China was not open to Westerners. But I want to give the example of one graduate student I had in a class a couple of years ago who worked in the field of intelligence here in the military. And this person said that their office had access to literally millions of data points about China. They would scrape information from the internet. And this person said, the problem is that without the context, we don't know what to make of it. We don't know how to understand it. We don't know how to think about these data points. What do they mean to people? We think they mean one thing, but maybe if we knew more about China, we would realize to the people producing the data, the information, it actually means something different. And so, how does this data fit into larger trends and histories, how it intersects with other issues or ideologies? It's really hard to make sense of it. And it actually becomes dangerous because you think it's like the confirmation bias, right? You think you're seeing something in the data that maybe is actually your own assumption about how the world works and is not really what's going on in China. And so I think context is really everything. And that's the kind of context you get by being there. You can't get that from scraping the internet or sitting home and watching videos on TikTok, or maybe something not TikTok after the next congressional vote.
Thank you, Cathy, for sharing this personal story. So now we move to Brent, who will answer this question more with an eye to UH Mānoa institutional perspective and perspective of students.
Well, I was struck by a comment that the Deputy Secretary made about how many people in the State Department dealing with China study abroad in China. Yes. And so I was struck by that, and I thought, that was probably back in the 1990s
or
earlier, when it wasn't so easy to go to
right.
China, when things weren't so open, relations were probably worse than they are now. I was there in 1990. I arrived on June 4th, 1990, the 1-year anniversary of Tiananmen. And it was a transformational experience for me to be there. And so I think, from an institutional perspective, our, particularly in the Office of Global Engagement, is to encourage our students to engage. And the importance of that engagement, of course, is the individual transformational experience. But to understand a place, to have been in a place, and then eventually our students will be in leadership positions, will be in the State Department, be in other places where they're making policy, and to understand a place, to have interacted with people from the country with which we're dealing, I think our hope contributes to broader understanding. And so you hope those people in the State Department who have been to China, lived in China, engaged with it, carry with them some fondness for the people of China, some hope that we can move to a positive place. So I think it's really that human understanding that you advance by actually interacting with people different from yourself and embracing it and living in a different culture.
Okay.
Could I just add one more thing? Because the panel, we've mostly been talking about the importance of study abroad. And I just wanted to add a few sentences about the importance of having international students on your campus, and particularly students from China. Because in addition to working at the Center for Asian and Pacific Studies, I took an MA while I was there in American Studies. And it was at a department heavily populated with international students. And the fascination of looking at American history and American culture through the eyes of my fellow students from other countries was just so exciting and so much more rewarding than if I'd been sitting in a class filled with, fellow Americans. So I want to make sure we don't forget that there's a two-way exchange.
Thank you, Peggy, for adding that. Okay, in our second round of questions, we want to give our panelists an opportunity to demonstrate a little bit more of their expertise. So we have for each panelist a more specialized question. Peggy, we want to start with you. How are US-China academic exchanges doing nationally? And are there still federal funds available to support US students and faculty to go to China?
Well, thank you for that question. Actually, I think the Deputy Secretary touched on this a little bit, and I was pleased to know that he saw it the same way that we see it through our research, our annual survey of international students in the US and American students going abroad. Basically, since the pandemic, there's been a huge decline in American students studying in China. There was the peak. Even the highest year when American students were the most going to China was not very high. It was in 2018, there were about 15,000 American students who studied in China every year. It's now dropped to a few hundred. And part of it is the pandemic, but part of it is not the pandemic. Part of it is concerns by parents, concerns by professors, concerns by the students. Part of it is the level 3 travel warning, but this is very serious for our future national security and for academic research. The good news is that the Chinese enrollment in the United States have not dropped that much. There's a lot of sort of mythology that, oh, nobody can get a visa and nobody's applying. But in fact, the number of Chinese graduate students in the US higher education is almost at pre-COVID levels. The number of undergraduate students from China has declined slightly, but still we have over very close to 300,000 Chinese students on US campuses, which is at its peak was 320,000. So it really is quite a good statement of Chinese continued interest in studying here, a tribute to American higher education that more of them come to the United States than to any other country. We host about almost double the next highest host country, which would be the UK and Australia. But the other thing I think that's important is that there's been rumors that you can't get a visa. The Chinese are being denied their visas, so no wonder nobody's coming. But this last summer, the US Embassy in Beijing issued almost 70,000 visas to Chinese students wanting to come to the United States. And of the whole global F1 visa category, Chinese students got about 25% of the total. So it's really, it is true that there are certain fields, that are, it's harder to get a visa if you're in artificial intelligence or if you're in nuclear, missile building. But on the whole, our country still very much welcomes international students and students from China in particular. And I think that President Biden has said this at a high level, and it's been true really up and down, and certainly American campuses welcome Chinese students. Let me quickly just pivot to the question of, are there still federal funds available to support US students and faculty to go to China? Unfortunately, right now, both the Fulbright program remains suspended for both Hong Kong and China, as are all other federally funded programs with China, such as the Gilman scholarships and the NSEP funding for graduate students, which means that as I think Cathy said, American scholars and students are looking to other areas, other places where they can get a similar experience. Many are going to Taiwan, which actually the Fulbright program in Taiwan doubled or tripled when it ended in China. There's also private exchange opportunities. The Stanford University's language program in Beijing, the Schwarzman Scholar Program at Tsinghua, various programs hosted by Chinese universities, which are very actively trying to attract Americans and have offered scholarships both at the national level, and also individual universities in China are offering scholarships. So I would recommend checking out the UH Study Abroad Office, which will have a lot more information about this. And also IIE has a website where you can click on opportunities, funding for study abroad, and it will list all the opportunities we know, including our own Freeman Awards for study in Asia.
Thank you, Peggy, for providing this very detailed national perspective. So let's zoom in then on our local situation and ask Brent to talk about how are US and China academic exchanges doing at UH Mānoa compared to the national picture. And I was wondering if you could mention also what are the key reasons we continue to see lower levels of academic exchanges with China and UH Mānoa. And maybe you can also comment on what opportunities with China that UH Mānoa hasn't taken advantage of.
So unfortunately, the picture at UH Mānoa mirrors the national picture, and I think in some areas maybe worse. So to just give some numbers, in 2018, we had 47 students study abroad in China, 13 this year, so a decline of 34 or 72%. We had 13 inbound and outbound exchange students in 2018. We've had 0 for the last 4 years, so every year 0. Although we have 4 who've indicated an intention to go in the fall, so good news is maybe we're seeing some turnaround. We had 32 active Chinese university partners in 2018, and we have 11 today, which is a decline of 21 or 65%. On the positive side, we have 7 new partnerships under discussion. On the Chinese students, we actually continue to see declines. So we had 183 students from China in 2018, and we have 124 this year. So that's a decline of 59 or 32%. So we haven't seen the turnaround that we have seen nationally. And particularly of concern is we have many fewer scholars from China than in the past. We had 134 scholars from China in 2018, and we have 25 this year. So that's a decline of 109 or 81%. So, you know, what you've really seen, and I think the Deputy Secretary pointed this out as well, is really a precipitous decline, both in students going abroad, but also in us having scholars here. You know, I think the reasons for that, we've talked about that a lot today. It really is an environment that I think is chilling exchange with China, from both sides, from the US government side and from the Chinese side. I think there's a lot of fear, and I think a lot of that fear is overwrought. And so, you know, hopefully, you know, changing level 3 to level 2 or less will help lessen some of that fear. I'm not to say that the fear is completely unwarranted, but I think that it's a bit overwrought. And I think in the context of students, when you have the Chinese government or President Xi saying, we want 50,000 students from the United States, I think that's signaling that these students are going to be safe and okay to study in China. So I think that's part of the reasons. I think that there are opportunities for us to engage in China, with China, that UH Mānoa has not yet taken advantage of. There are hundreds of universities, including many US universities, that have cooperative programs with Chinese universities, where students earn a degree from the Chinese university partner and the US partner, and they earn that degree fully in China with an option to come study at the partner. In this case, it would be UH Mānoa. Just as an example, the University of Arizona, during my time there, opened 5 cooperative programs or 4 cooperative programs and 1 joint college with 8 different degrees. And now there are 2,000 students earning University of Arizona degrees in China, and about 10% of those come to the university in Tucson every year. So if you think about an opportunity for us, I mean, we don't have any cooperative programs in China, so we can certainly have one. Many Chinese universities are looking for partners, and these are top high quality universities. And we've heard the Deputy Secretary lay out an area of cooperation, climate science, so that, or maybe marine biology might be another one. But we have areas where we could collaborate, particularly at the undergrad level, that don't raise the type of concerns that it does at the graduate level. And if the real advantage of exchange, right, is building connection, you can build those connections among undergraduate students where maybe the stakes are less concerned, there's less competition, there are fewer areas where we can't, you know, cooperate. And so I would say that's our opportunity, and we should be looking for, among, you know, our many deep partners in China, a place to have a cooperative program, our program in China, and then have those students sometime here.
Thank you. I hope our provost or president was listening. So I think in order to put these great comments that Peggy and Brent offered in the context, I would like to invite Baoyan and Cathy to talk a little bit about, to provide a broader context. So my question here is, what role have educational exchanges played in international relations in general, and in the US-China relations in particular in recent history? And what about the future?
Okay, I'll start by providing some historical context. Educational exchange is not a new idea. In fact, it's an ancient idea. For example, ancient Greeks were among the first to attract and host foreign students from far away. As in the Chinese context, as Sui Dynasty in the 6th century, China played host to foreign students, and during the Tang Dynasty, the number of foreign students really increased greatly. In the American context, international education exchange started in the 19th century with missionaries who spread Protestant values in Asia, Africa, and Latin America. The concept of international educational exchange, as we see today, was developed in the 20th century. The Institute of International Education, where Peggy works, which was founded in 1919, was one of the first agencies that promoted international education and cultural exchanges. The second half of the 20th century saw rapid rise in international educational exchanges around the world, especially after World War II, as the US and other world powers devoted resources trying to prevent similar tragedy of wars in the future. The creation of the Fulbright program in 1946 was one of many such efforts. In terms of the role of educational exchange in international relations, from a government perspective, international educational exchanges have been closely linked with nation building and diplomacy. Those would be the two most important motivations for government to be engaged in educational exchanges. I would argue that in the Chinese case, it has been more about nation building, whereas in the American case, it has more been about diplomacy. In the Chinese context, there have been arguably 3 waves of students studying overseas, which I don't really have time to go into detail with. But I would like to mention Rong Hong was the first Chinese ever to have been awarded a degree from American institution, came to the US in 1847 at the age of 19, and he eventually got his degree from Yale. Okay, so my time is up. Can I have 1 more minute? And he received his degree from Yale in 1854. And the following 200 years, nearly 200 years of China's history of educational exchange, there's a common theme that is China's quest for self-strengthening through learning from the West. In other words, Chinese government's motivation was to learn science and technology through learning from the West, which was considered the most effective way to strengthen China. In the American case, the US government has been using educational exchange, soft power and public diplomacy tool to support its foreign policy goals through promoting a positive image of the US and spreading its values and culture around the world. Thank you.
So yeah, the role of education. I want to talk about the future maybe a little bit more. Baoyan's done an admirable job talking about the importance of educational exchange in the past. I guess I want to talk about how much things have changed in the China field since I started studying, learning, engaging with China 30 years ago. I mean, a lot of things have changed, but the last time, a couple of years ago, I taught, for the first time in many years, I taught a graduate seminar, sort of intro to China at the graduate level. And what really struck me was how, when I started in the China field 30 years ago, Americans studying China had to learn, I felt like we were learning about a really, really different place. While they have really different problems than we have, we need to try to understand them from their perspective and see and try to wrap our heads around, where all these issues came from and how they're dealing with them. the course I taught last year, I was struck by how many of the problems that both countries are dealing with are the same, right? Not just climate change, obviously, but ethnic relations, gender relations, educational pressures on young people, youth unemployment, the barrage of disinformation, social media, sort of addiction, unaffordable cities. People can't afford to buy a flat in most of the cities in both of our countries. Aging population, delayed marriage, low birth rates, it goes on and on and on and on. So perhaps more than ever, it seems to me there's stuff we can learn from each other, right? We don't have to approach these problems the same way, but if we understand what's China doing to try to solve these problems and what's the US doing and why, I think there's a lot we can learn to sort of address not just the international kind of relations problems, but domestic problems in our own countries and really sort of benefit the people of both countries. But the only way to do that, to really engage with each other and understand the approaches we're taking, is to engage with each other up close and directly. There's really no substitute for that. So that's why I think educational exchanges is as important or more important than ever.
Thank you so much. Now it's actually time for our open discussion. I was wondering, are there any questions from the audience? Check on the chat line. Actually, we're running a little bit late, right? So, well, if there are no questions from the audience, I think I would like to invite our panelists to offer their comments. This is our wrap-up session then. And I was wondering if each of you, in addition to your own takeaway from this panel and reflection on Kurt Campbell's comment, could also share with us what you thought about, I think, these two key phrases that he mentioned in his talk, which is building a global operating system, right? And habits of cooperation that Cathy already mentioned earlier. So he seems to, I mean, his comments were, I think, very detailed, and he talked a lot about the challenges, but also, like the rest of our panel here, about similarities with Cathy, just, I think, outlined really. And I think his suggestion was, right, as I stuck in my head, he kept mentioning this building a global operating system, and that we all, both sides, have to develop habits of cooperation. So perhaps this is, if you could share with us what you think, how do we build this global operating system, or how do we cultivate this habit of cooperation so that both China and US and everybody who believes in the importance of international education exchanges can work together and can move forward rather than being stuck. So Peggy, I'd like to invite you to share your comments first.
I'd like to focus particularly on the second issue of the habits of cooperation, although I would say that as the two largest economies in the world and the two countries with the largest military and science and technology expertise in the world, it's vital that we work together on these major global issues, because it's going to be impossible to make any impact globally and to keep the world order without the relationship between the US and China being, even if competitive, at least respectfully competitive. But speaking about the habits of cooperation, I honestly think this gets back to the need for immersion in Chinese culture and Chinese immersion in American culture at an early age. I think the example of Sun Yat-sen, who really understood American democracy in his bones by having lived here. The same thing is true the other way around. I mean, the friends that I made of the early Chinese scholars coming to Stanford in 1979, 1980, and we became very personally invested in each other. And it was seeing them see America through their eyes helped me understand a little bit why China feels the way it reacts sometimes the way it does. Wonderful, the man who actually was editor of the China Daily way back when it was actually a wonderful democratic paper. He refused, when he first came, 1979, refused to be impressed by anything in the United States. We took him to the Grand Canyon, we took him to San Francisco. Nothing was as comparable to what was in China. And it started to irritate me. And then I started thinking about the history of China and how they felt so humiliated. This great culture, this great civilization that really was the center of the world for many, or the center of Asia for sure, for many centuries, they were too proud at this point to let America's literary accomplishments impress them. And that has helped me understand Chinese reactions ever since. And then another friend who became very close to us, and we went to stay with his family and he stayed with our family, he was a devout communist and he was impressed by the value system that the Chinese communists had originally intended for China. And when China changed and became basically a capitalist communist society, it kind of broke his heart. And he felt that the Chinese young people now have no values because they're not religious and they're not communist and they're not democratic. And that, I think it helps me understand we need to keep talking, but it's not just enough to talk. You have to profoundly understand where the other person is coming from. Apologies, that was too long a personal answer, but.
Thank you.
Okay, well, I'll try to keep my response short, and I'll focus on the other metaphor, the building a global operating system. What that conjures to me is, on the one hand, yes, of course, we need to cooperate, we need to have a system, we need to have, globally, and we need to operate, together. But what the global operating system conjures to me is this sort of seamless, single program that we all kind of follow and we're all in line, we're all kind of in lockstep with each other. And if we get out of lockstep, then we get the blue screen of death, or whatever you get on your operating system on your computer if it doesn't work. That scares me a little bit because I think that underplays the value of diversity and friction. There's an anthropologist named Cheng who's talked about friction as something we feel like we need to avoid, but friction is what makes the world go around. Friction is like when the rubber hits the road, that's what makes you go, right? And so we don't want to sort of, say that there has to be a single global operating system that we all kind of fall in line with, but rather to appreciate the diversity. I mean, China is so diverse and complex and fascinating, and you go from the north to the south and it's like you're in different countries. It's just amazing. And we don't want to sort of, straitjacket that all into a single global operating system. So I just want to sort of make a plea for, let's not forget the amazing diversity, both within and between China and the US. And we want to build on that. I think that's what makes the world go around.
Brent?
Well, I was struck earlier by Professor Clayton's listing all the things that we have in common, all the common challenges we need to confront. And so, kind of thinking how we focus on what is in common as opposed to where we disagree.
Right.
And I think education holds a great potential for us to get people in a room together to just struggle with the same things, to think about things together, to read a text and talk about what that text means to different people from different positionality. I had a chance to teach a class at NYU Abu Dhabi where 18 students from 18 different countries all together. And we weren't talking about anything particularly political. I was doing a law class, but we engaged with the text together. And those students have an educational experience where in all of their classes, they're interacting with people who come from different countries, different cultures, different first languages. And so I think, this of course applies to China, beyond China, but if you take it in the China context, how about classes where we have Chinese students and US students together, either physically or through COIL, an online learning class, where it has nothing to do with our political disagreements, but rather, solving a common challenge or engaging with a common text, watching a movie together and
Having
talking
fun.
about
You can have fun. China's fun too. It's not all about like,
exactly.
It's fun.
And then once you have those exchanges, I think, it reinforces our commonality as human beings and also helps us understand the positionality of those who are different.
Great.
Okay, well, while the global cooperating system sounds all nice and grand, it has to start somewhere small and oftentimes on individual level. As all the other panelists mentioned, I would also join them in emphasizing the people-to-people exchange, the non-political aspect of educational exchanges, because those exchanges help to develop lasting relationship enduring networks and lifelong friendships. It's those relationships and networks that help to increase global understanding and help to improve international relations.
Great. Well, I'm afraid we're at the end of our time, I think. Yes, we are. Okay, so I'd like to thank all of our participants, particularly Peggy. I think it's already 10 o'clock in New York, isn't it? For joining our panel today, and many thanks
Just
to
9 o'clock.
Oh, 9 o'clock. Okay, great. And thank all our participants today, the people who joined us here in this room, and all our participants online. Thank you very much for supporting our China Town Hall event today. And I would also like to point out that if you're interested in this particular event, the National Committee has a very good and detailed website where you can find also previous China Town Hall meetings. And our session today has been recorded and it will be uploaded to the CCS YouTube website in about a week. You can go on our CCS website to find the information. And finally, I think we should all applaud our panelists for providing their expertise for this exciting discussion today. Thank you very much.